whatever your board is, don't deal with anything on a personal level. Deal with it as an organization that has personal impact, and try to maintain that type of demeanor and feeling. But I would ask anybody on a board, patience is critical. Patience is critical.
HOA Insights, common sense for common areas, exists to help all 2 million volunteer board members nationwide have the right information at the right time to make the right decisions for their future. This podcast is sponsored by 4 companies that care about board members: Association Insights and Marketplace, Association Reserves, Community Financials, and Kevin Davis Insurance Services. You'll find links to their websites and social media in the show notes.
Thankless job. What comes to your mind when you hear those 2 words? Well, having served on the board of my condominium association for several years, followed by decades of experience in this industry, there is one job that, without a doubt, deserves to be at the top of the list: an elected volunteer HOA board member. So a regular feature of our weekly podcast is 1 episode a month devoted to sharing the stories of real-life unsung board heroes. In our eyes, a board hero is one of the 2 million elected volunteers who are worthy of recognition for simply performing a thankless job well. If you match our definition of a board hero or know someone who does, please reach out to us. Our contact details are provided in the show notes. Well, welcome back to HOA Insights, Common Sense for Common Areas. I'm Robert Nordland, and I'm here to share the story of an unsung board hero named Jim Hopkins. This is episode 69, and if you missed meeting our other board heroes, you can find them easily on our website, hoainsights.org, on our YouTube channel, or by subscribing to HOA Insights on your favorite podcast platform. But before you hear Jim's story, let me introduce you to one of our sponsors.
Hi, I'm Kevin Davis, the president of Kevin Davis Insurance Services. Our experienced team of underwriters will help you when you get that declination. We provide the voice of reason, someone who will stand by you. Our underwriters bring years of knowledge to our clients that can't be automated by technology or driven by price. As a proud ANWINS company, we bring true value to your community association clients. We are your community association insurance experts.
My name is Jim Hopkins, and I serve as a volunteer on the board of directors at Laguna Woods Village for about 4 years now. When I'm not wearing a board member's hat, I'm retired, but I continue to put my financial consulting skills to use often. The 3 words I would use to describe the job of being a board member are that it is unique, challenging, and rewarding. The main story I'd like to tell today is the story of our organization and how we run it. Our governance structure is more challenging than smaller complexes because it is rewarding to solve the problems that it presents to us.
Laguna Woods Village is a massive 3.4 square mile, 55 and older community in Orange County, California, made up of over 12,000 units, including condos, cooperatives, and high-rises. The property is about 60 years old. 72% is owner-occupied, and they have an annual budget of $185 million. And I said that correctly. This is a huge association. Jim has lived in the community for 11 years and has served on the board for 4 of those years, first as the board treasurer and currently as the board president. We decided to kick off this interview, as we often do, by asking Jim what motivated him to join the board.
I looked at my background and some of the things that were happening, and I decided that with my background, I may be able to assist in the transition from a purchase property manager to a self-run property management. I like to contribute, and it makes me feel good that my contributions can make a difference. And that's really the reason I joined the board. I had every notion to retire and go on a lot of cruises, which I did when I first got here. Went on a lot of cruises. And then my wife became ill, so that kind of went out the window. and I decided to join the board.
Jim is a great example of a resident that joined the board not to pursue their own agenda, but to assist with a project that would benefit the community at large. Jim had more to say about that experience later on, so stay tuned. Before we get to that, however, we wanted to know more about the community structure and the board structure at Laguna Woods Village, including the number of members, length of terms, and whether each seat had term limits or not.
The community is made up of 3 housing mutuals. One would be United. That's made up of about 6,300 cooperatives. The other one other mutual is Third Mutual, which are condos. There are about 6,100 of those. And then the third mutual is called Mutual 50, and it is made up of 2 14-story towers. And there are about 311 units there. So in total, there's 12,736 units in the community. On my board, and this is where the complex management structure or the board structure comes in. On my board, there are 11 members. We are called GRF, or Golden Rain Foundation Board of Directors, but there are also 4 other boards. One is the Board of Directors for the property manager, which is made up of all residents. The other 3 boards are the mutuals or housing mutuals, and that's made up of 11, 11, and 5. There are 9 on the property managers board, and all of these are residents. Essentially, so there are 11 on my board, but 47 in total. Each term is 3 years, but there are no term limits. I believe we had them at one point in time, but I think recent civil code says that you really cannot. Civil code is what we govern, all HOAs are governed by in California. I think civil code made those, we had to delete that statute.
Jim went on to clarify that his board, the Golden Rain Foundation, or GRF for short, is responsible for the upkeep of all the services and amenities that Laguna Woods Village offers to its residents. We next asked Jim about the relative ease of getting elected to the boards in his community.
Well, let's talk about GRF board, because again, there are 5 boards. I would say GRF becomes the most difficult because it is essentially voted on by the 3 mutuals, the board of directors of the 3 mutuals. So you really have, 27 votes. And we have a pretty rigorous interview process. We're founded by a GRF trust. And so the whole governance structure, you really have to know the trust, not as an attorney, but you just have to understand how it impacts who does what to whom within the governance structure. So there's a lot of questions on that. So I would say it's more difficult to jump through the hoops for GRF than it is for the mutuals, which those board members are elected by the residents. And so there's a campaign and, all of the things that go along with a campaign. There's some of them do actually go out and get material to persuade the residents. And of course, you're dealing with 6,000 residents on each end. So that can be costly. Just to add to that, of course, with our TV station, we also, their interviews, we have a professional host that is part of our TV6. And there are times when they'll come on and interview the candidates because everybody has an equal chance. It's quite extensive. We're like I said, we're 90%, 95% of the city of Laguna Woods. So we have to do it right.
While many of our listeners and viewers are board members, very few of them live in communities that are as large as Laguna Woods Village and that are governed by multiple boards. So this prompted us to ask how many hours Jim invests every week into the governance of such a large community.
Interestingly enough, I'm spending less time now than I was as treasurer because I have a tendency to delegate and follow up. And with that said, I still have to be in tune with everything. So we broadcast our meetings so I can access our committee meetings. So I stay in touch, but I don't have to do as much. It's more decisions and adding to the process. So I would say between 15 and 40 hours per week. It depends on the circumstance.
After Jim had clued us into the board structure at Laguna Woods Village, we wanted to know more about him as a board member. So we asked Jim about his personality and if he brings any special gifts or talents to his board of directors.
My personality would be pleasant, flexible, but firm on the facts. I usually take a leadership role. And not because I try for it, because people kind of look to me based on how I project or whatever it is to lead. And I end up in leadership roles no matter what. So whatever it is, because you never know how other people see your personality. I think I'm pleasant and a nice guy. My friends think so, but there are times when my colleagues don't think so.
We next wanted to know whether Jim had any favorite or least favorite aspects of serving on the board of the GRF. Here's what Jim had to say.
Well, my favorite is working with positive, flexible, and informed board members and residents. My least favorite is just the opposite, and you get a ton of those. What I found out, though, is that other side is a relatively small segment of this population. They just make a bigger noise. But they have to be listened to because they're not necessarily wrong. They're seeing something, they're hearing something. And so you do have to listen. And we do. And many times it's only their experience, which still means something. But we still have to, that's our job. That's our job.
In a post-COVID world, it's become very common for boards to adopt virtual or hybrid formats for their board meetings. And we often ask the board heroes we feature on this program about how they've handled that transition. But Jim mentioned something very interesting in a previous answer about how the boards in his community broadcast their meetings over their own TV station. Naturally, we wanted to know more and decided to ask Jim to speak on that.
30 years ago, the cable company that was supplying us went bankrupt, and we bought them out of bankruptcy. So we actually operate our own cable company, okay? So we buy the programming just like any other cable company. The challenge is it's only 12,736 of us forever. So as programming goes up, the price goes up. That's not comfortable for anybody. But we broadcast that over our TV6, which is our channel. We also now, with the internet, it's obviously rebroadcasts on the internet through YouTube. We also broadcast during the meetings. The meetings are held in the boardroom. We also broadcast on something called Granicus. So it's being broadcast to all the community at that time, at the time it occurs. And then later on, of course, it's available on TV6 at a later time, usually the same day. And it's also available on the internet. So, with 18,000 residents, communication becomes very critical because most are out playing golf and enjoying all of the amenities and services that we give them.
While the COVID-19 pandemic might not have affected the attendance, conduct, and distribution of board meetings at Laguna Woods Village, it certainly affected and created topics of discussion at their board meetings. Jim provided us with further details on that subject.
Well, the political aspect of COVID notwithstanding, okay, we had inoculations or vaccinations, I guess you'd say, that were free. Quite a few took advantage of that. It did shut down quite a few of the amenities. Obviously you had to wear a mask and a lot of other things. It also initiated some work from home environments with our HOA property manager. So those things actually helped us to then look at what else do we need in our software and administrative system to support the future, as things change quite rapidly now. And we just start to adapt. Of course, since people couldn't take advantage of some of the amenities, We also returned the surplus because we budgeted a certain surplus, and so that became part of their HOA fees. And for the next 2 or 3 years, we actually returned some of the surplus. So that's practically done now, and now we're starting to operate, on a day-to-day basis, on a year-to-year basis.
So far, it seemed that Jim had a positive view of the GRF board and the work that he's accomplished as a part of it. We next asked him how he felt about the culture of the board, and here's what he had to say.
Well, I think the culture of our board is independent, friendly. We'll debate. We enjoy each other. There are times when we get upset at each other, being on different sides, but it's never personal. And I think that's what makes or can make a board easy and pleasant to work with. We got some tough decisions at times. And so it's good that people feel free to express themselves and are flexible enough to hear the other side and maybe sometimes agree with the other side. So I enjoy with the board. In fact, the board meetings themselves are almost anticlimactic. It's really because of our committee structure, because for every amenity and or service, there is a committee. My particular board has 16 committees, and a lot of the issues get solved at the committee level. That's the difference. So most of the time, by the time it comes up to the board level, all of the completed staff work, resident input has been done. Only very seldom do we hear the whole story and perhaps go against the committee recommendation. Very rarely. We have done so, but very rarely. So that's what makes our structure, I think, a little bit different, is that the committee structure. And some of the critical committees that are involved in strategic decisions, I will be closer to, because one of my goals when I got here was to deal with more of the strategic rather than the everyday issues.
Now, you may recall that Jim's reasoning and motivation to join the GRF board was that he felt he could help transition Laguna Woods Village from retaining an external property management company to a property management company that they own outright. We wanted to know if he had succeeded and asked if they still retain an external property manager.
We did up till 2016. We then decided to form our own corporation. And because we are so large, many of the people who came from the old property manager decided to go with the new company. And I wasn't part of that. But you think about it, we're so large. It's about 700. Our property manager company has about 700 full-time equivalents. When we decided to go on our own, the old property manager now had roughly 700 jobs that it no longer had use for. So many of them did come with us, and I don't know the number. But we did hire some of the executives. We hired new executives. Obviously, we hired a new CEO. Okay. And we also created our own board of directors for this particular company. And as a result of that, a lot of the onus and responsibility kind of shifts to the board. It is a separate corporation, by the way, right? And so there has to be a corporate separation. There also has to be some level of oversight through their board, not the HOA board. That corporation that serves as our self-owned property manager has a board that operates as a business. So we as board members have to be very mindful of our limitations in getting involved in property managers' activities, such as personnel management. It makes it unique. And of course, given the fact that we are young people set in our ways, telling someone that's, always been involved to tell them that, no, you don't have anything to do with that particular person over there. Okay. Sometimes that is challenging, but we get it done. We get it done.
Well, it seemed like starting their own property management company was the best solution for the community at large. It did come with its own challenges for the board as well. We were curious if maintaining this new company on top of their own cable company and all of the amenities at Laguna Woods Village was putting any financial strain on their board. So we asked Jim if he considered their association to be well funded.
Yes, yes. We have done a pretty good job of, obviously, we make our budgets every year, the operating budget. On the reserve side, we are also well funded. In fact, when I first came into GRF, one of the first things I looked at was the reserve. And it occurred to me that we were, and I had no knowledge of the reserve study and all those kind of things, but it just occurred to me, given the amount of assets that we managed, that we may or may not be funded adequately. And then when I got into become the treasurer, what I found out is we have been funded adequately. However, given the age of the structures, et cetera, perhaps we weren't growing our fund the way it needed to grow or needed to be funded. So that's when we actually got a professional. We had actually been doing our own. It's not required. First of all, it's not required to have a reserve. But secondly, it's not required to have a professional study. But I thought we would have a professional study. It turns out we did. Our property management company had been structuring its own reserve approach. And it turns out it pretty much matched what professional people were doing. The one thing they didn't do is they had something called a threshold. And their threshold was fairly low, given the fact that we could be hit with a fairly large expense at any time, or something that we wanted to do, some sort of amenity that we wanted to get into. So at that point, I started to look at it, do analysis on it. And that's when we decided to increase, not the HOA contribution, but there's something called a transfer facilities fee. Upon buying into Laguna Woods, the new owner pays a one-time fee. And what we did is we increased that. And of course, most of the people are coming in retired. The fee increase did not dissuade anybody from coming in. And it's also done in other communities. And in our sister communities, Walnut Creek and Seal Beach, both in California, they've been doing it for years.
As a community association reserve specialist and the founder of a company that performs reserve studies, I was very happy to hear that Jim and the rest of the GRF reached out to a professional to see how they could bolster the financial health of their association. And they accomplished that without needing to increase the monthly HOA obligations of the homeowners. With all that being said, we are curious as to how much the GRF was setting aside in reserves, so we asked Jim what their percent funded was.
Currently, we're well over 50%. Okay. The thing is, though, because, and again, this is GRF, so these are amenities. If you're in housing, you're spending a more predictable amount each year, because it's basically to make sure roofs and other things are done, especially when you talk about 3.4 square miles. So it's a basically continuing maintenance, and it's not technically maintenance, but it is basically enhancing or continuing to maintain the house values while operating at the same time with the operating fund. So there's a continually spending level within those. With ours, that is GRF, we're dealing with amenities and buildings. Sometimes, for instance, we are just starting the renovation of the first clubhouse building. It's 60 years old, never been renovated. So yeah, I mean, it's been juiced up, but never been renovated. So here we are, we're going to renovate it. Right now it's closed. It'll be open in August. It's scheduled to be reopened in August. It's closed in March. And that's about a $3.5 million renovation. So when you got $3.5 million that's going to be spent in 6 months, you got to be prepared for that. And so ours is more start-stop than steady. That's why we have to maintain a pretty good abundant balance. We also own our own TV company. We also own the cable network, which means the underground, which means at some point in time, perhaps, that's going to need to be replaced. So we have a lot of these things that, and by the way, all of this is part of the understanding and study, even though it has not occurred yet. When we have an asset, the first thing we start to do is to reserve for its replacement or enhancement. And that starts at the beginning, the purchase of that asset or the completion of that asset. That's why when I understood that and looked at our quote threshold, I said, we're not operating, we need to look at this differently. And so we now group the first 5 years, we know more about what's going to happen within 5 years than after that. And obviously we budget for the first year or allocate for the first year. So our planning system, our planning approach is now, first year obviously is the allocation. Years 2 through 5, we kind of know what's coming down the pike. So that's more appropriately planned. After that becomes projection.
We thought it was great that the GRF was starting to reserve for a components replacement as soon as it was first purchased. Proactive reserve planning is good reserve planning. We next asked Jim what the board's focus will be in the coming year.
One of the things that I'm focused on, besides all of the day-to-day stuff, and many of the officers are focused in on too, is understanding the processes that need to be firmed in order to get better outcomes. For instance, communicating to 18,000 residents and have them be interested is a challenge, okay? And so we're working on that. When we send out an email to all the residents, we look at open rates, we look at all of these things. What are they interested in? When you put this particular item in, what's the open rate? Well, obviously some people never open, but sometimes when information starts to travel that they're interested in, you'll see the open rate go up maybe a week later. So you see all of these things happening. And also structure. The governance structure is the governance structure, but there's some working with the other boards and some limitations and ground rules that we need to make sure that we all agree to, so that we can have a system that benefits the community, not just Board A, Board B, Board C. So we're looking at that. The financial planning, we made some changes in. Just in how it's done, to the point where we used to reach the end of the financial planning process and there'd be no disagreement. Now we've changed the meeting process around so that you get agreement on certain things up front. So by the time you get to the end, it's kind of like a smooth landing. Okay, even if the issues or the number is not a good number, it's still understood. So again, I would say structure and process are our main goals. The day-to-day stuff is usually handled well at the committee level. Our property manager handles the day-to-day service level, amenities. They handle that fantastically. While we listen to complaints and hear them, we also know that they're between 5 and 7% of the population. The 95, 97% of the community is happy with what they have. They're busy playing golf, tennis, pickleball, whatever it is they like, okay? And we have over 250 clubs here.
Finally, we wanted to close out this episode, as we often do, by asking Jim if he had any words of advice to impart on any board members tuning into this program.
Whatever your board is, don't deal with anything on a personal level. Deal with it as an organization that has personal impact, and try to maintain that type of demeanor and feeling. It's very difficult here. I'm a corporate person and we would debate things, but it's more difficult in this environment, because of the age and stage of the residents and the board members, the organizational structure. When it comes down to those things, I don't get anger, I don't get mad, I can get firm, because I can never lose it. because of what people say or how they say it. It's always a job. It's not who I am. That's tough to maintain that difference. I've had corporate training to do that, and that's part of who I am. But I would ask anybody on a board, patience is critical. Patience is critical.
We want to publicly acknowledge Jim for performing a thankless job well, and compliment the board of directors at Laguna Woods Village for taking their responsibility seriously to act in the best interests of their individual associations. We hope you gain some HOA insights from Jim's story and that it helps you bring common sense to your common area. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to another great episode next week. And remember, if you match our definition of a board hero or know someone who does, please reach out to us. Our contact details are provided in the show notes.
You've been listening to HOA Insights, common sense for common areas. You can listen to the show on our podcast website, hoainsights.org, or subscribe on any of the most popular podcast platforms. You can also watch the show on our YouTube channel. Check the show notes for helpful links. If you like the show and want to support the work we do, you can do so in a number of ways. The most important thing that you can do is engage in the conversation. Leave a question in the comment section on our YouTube videos. You can also email your questions or voice memos to podcast@reservestudy.com or leave us a voicemail at 805-203-3130. If you gain any insights from the show, please do us a huge favor by sharing the show with other board members that you know. You can also support us by supporting the brands that support this program. Please remember that the views and opinions expressed by the podcast do not constitute legal advice. You'll want to consult your own legal counsel before making any important decisions. Finally, this podcast was expertly mixed and mastered by Stokelight Video and Marketing. With Stokelight on your team, you'll reach more customers with marketing expertise that inspires action. See the show notes to connect with Stokelight.